Okay, hi everybody, good evening. I am very keen to make a prompt start. I don't want us to go too far past the 7:30 mark for beginning, and you'll soon realise why once Dr. Collier starts her presentation because it's so wonderful. I just wanted to do a quick introduction, share a little bit about what this presentation is today, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Collier. So welcome everybody. I am Sally with Smart Families. Sorry, these are my pets behind me that are making all that noise. I'm the program director for Smart Families, and it's just an honour to have you all here with us for this webinar. Thank you for your time. We know evenings are busy, so we really appreciate that you have taken out this chunk of your evening to come and join us today. This is Dr. Collier's presentation of Chapter 4, which is the middle school chapter of her book, the NeuroWhereWhereAbouts Guide. For those of you who are familiar with Dr. Collier, you know that she needs no introduction because she is absolutely wonderful, and what she has to share is so important to us as we're walking and navigating parenting our middle school children. Just a quick introduction for those of you who don't know Dr. Collier. She is a therapist, prevention researcher, educator, and a person in long-term recovery. I want to just quickly share, we had a few questions this morning during the presentation. This chapter is from Dr. Collier's book that is available on the Smart Families website. So a lot of the content that you're going to see today can be found in this book, and we will share a little bit more about accessing this book, but it is available on our website at a discounted rate. So please utilize our chat facility. Myself and my colleagues who are on the call will be monitoring the chat, and we will be interjecting, and putting your questions to Dr. Collier as she is presenting. So without further ado, I would love to hand it over to you. Off you go, Dr. Collier.
Thank you, Sally. And I'm glad Dean's here, Hillary's here from Smart Families. Thank them for underwriting this event for us tonight. So I am going to be presenting from Chapter 4 in the NeuroWhereAbouts Guide, which is a book that I wrote that outlines 18 different high-risk behavior and how they affect neurodevelopment. So the first chapter is all about what healthy brain development and brain-based parenting is. The second chapter is how risky behavior hijack the brain, how it makes structural changes. Then third chapter is elementary. Fourth chapter, middle school, my favorite age. Fifth chapter is high school, and the sixth chapter is the tools section. And so if you are interested in receiving my newsletter or using my free online prevention programming, please go to knowyourneuro.org, knowyourneuro.org. You can get the books on Amazon, but the Smart Families Coalition, the Smart Families nonprofit organization is using my publisher's discount. So please go to their website and order it with that QR code there. And now what we're going to be doing tonight is talking about Chapter 4, which is all about middle school. So in each of my chapters, elementary, middle, and high school, I have divided the book into 2 sections. And so here are some of the topics that we're going to focus on tonight. Now, I go through these pretty quick, so if you have ideas or questions, please put it in the chat. They'll interrupt me, and we'll keep going. Now, the 2 sections that each chapter is divided into is, 1, the setup for success. So what you can do as a parent for those particular ages to set kids up for the best possible neurodevelopment that we can get a child's brain to develop into. The second half of each of these chapters includes the high-risk behavior that show up during that age group. And so if you want to find out what shows up in earlier or later, you'll have to go to chapters 3 and chapters 5 for the elementary and the high school. So we're going to get started with Chapter 4. So I'm assuming you guys have middle schoolers, but please feel free to ask questions about a child of any age. But these are the things that we're going to start talking about that set up a child for success before we jump into the things that really will freak you all out about risky behavior. But when we think about neurodevelopment, the changes that we see in this age are potentially good, bad, and ugly, depending upon what's going on in that child's brain. And so here's what we can expect. increases in novelty seeking because we have a fully mature fight or flight part of the brain, the limbic system, but yet the frontal lobe is not completely online yet. We're going to see a surge in hormones because kids are moving into puberty, but this increases stress, fear, and anger, as well as moodiness in middle schoolers. We see budding abstract reasoning skills because the frontal lobe's starting to come online, but that increases argumentativeness. A lot of parents will say to me, they want to argue about everything. And I always say, oh, good, that's normal. That means their brain is developing well. But what you can do is focus on anger management skills, shaping and teaching their behavior, rewarding them for good executive functioning skills, following rules, and developing values. Cultivate judgment in this age. We want to teach kids critical thinking skills and how to consider the pros and cons of their decisions, as well as refusal skills training. Now, these are the skills that are really critical to focus on during middle school because so many risky behaviors start popping up during this time. And with 100% of their accelerator and 10 to 15% of their brake, a lot of them are going to get into some trouble. So as a parent, you can focus on building executive functioning skills because those skills are growing based upon the brain's rule. Use it or lose it. Now, let me give you a beautiful, although kind of scary example of that. So this chart shows you the difference between EQ and IQ. Now, what I'm talking about with those acronyms is the difference between your psychosocial maturity and your intellectual ability. So your IQ, how smart you are, really tracks the whole brain working together. And you can see by that orange line that IQ's trajectory at about 10, 11 starts shooting up. It's almost as high as it's ever going to be, which is the peak at about age 25 when our IQ peaks. And then it kind of levels off from there and it stays pretty steady for the rest of our lives. But our EQ, our psychosocial maturity, this is a measure of our frontal lobe, those executive functioning skills that grow based upon the brain's rule. As you can see, it's kind of flatlining. And then at age 18, poof, it shoots up. Why do you think it starts really going up at about age 18? Think the brain's rule, use it or lose it. They have to go out and start fending for themselves and figuring out how to feed themselves, wash their laundry, get to class, or get to work on time. All of those things start happening. Now, this study was completed in the United States. If you looked at this research in another country where kids had to grow up much faster, you would see that blue line show much less of a gap. All kids have a gap. That's why it's a hard time for a parent to live in the gap. But remember that this blue line is shaped by what they're using. That is critical to know because if kids can, they should. If kids can do their laundry, they should. If kids can cook dinner, they should. Make sure they earn all the rewards that they get and grow those executive functioning skills. And if you don't remember what they are, please refer back to chapter 3. Remember, those are the basic executive functioning skills, thinking, feeling, and doing skills. Okay, now, when a child's frontal lobe is just starting to grow those abstract reasoning skills, which are higher level executive functioning, they start to argue and they put lots of power struggle worms in the water. Now, what I see parents do, the biggest mistake is they bite these worms. Now, once you do, you are the actual fish and they're reeling you in. So remember not to bite power struggle worms. One of the best ways that you can do that is use what I affectionately call duct tape therapy. At this age, we should be following the 90-10 rule. They talk 90% of the time, we talk 10. Our 10% needs to be in the form of some really good open-ended Socratic questioning. Tell me more. What do you think about this? What do you think might happen if you did that? Now, remember, kids are going to put power struggle worms in the water all the time. Each kid is a little different, and each kid will hook you differently. And so remember, I'll tell you one that happened to me recently. One of my clients was like, ugh, don't you know all the laws are being passed in the United States because marijuana is a medicine. It's healthy. It's safe for you. Now, if you know my work, you know I have studied that question and know all the research, but I'm not going to argue with that kid. It's just a big power struggle worm that he puts in the water. I simply said, hey, I totally get that this makes sense for you. All these laws are happening. This is really important to you, though, I'm hearing. I don't think your parents are going to let you smoke marijuana, but tell me more about how you get your research and why this is such a big deal for you. That is what we call a classic validation sandwich. One of the best things to use when your kiddo is engaging a power struggle worm in the water. And remember, duct tape therapy is the number one thing to use. Now, that's easier said than done. I get that, but really work on not engaging in that, because what we see is as adolescents move into middle school, their limbic system fully mature, the accelerator, the fight or flight, the concrete part of their brain that's really, really interested in novelty seeking. But their frontal lobe is not completely online till 25. Now, why is this like God's little joke to us? Maybe, I don't know why they get a fully formed accelerator before they get a break. Well, a lot of it has to do with puberty. Girls start engaging in puberty growth by about 11, 12, and boys about 11 to 16. Girls are usually about 2 years in front of boys, but then all of that development catches up when we all turn 25. Now, we have to be able to protect ourselves once we can procreate. And there's one of the reasons why the limbic system is online. Okay, here's what you're going to hear. When you approach kids and say, hey, you're going through some changes, let's talk about them. How do you feel? You know that kids are going to say, I don't know. Oh, I don't want to talk about this. Okay, important, very important. When kids say, I don't know, answer them by saying, well, tell me when you figure it out. It puts a little, I call it a brain worm in their brain. They'll be like trying to figure it out. And then later on, a couple of days later, they'll come to you and say, I think I figured it out. If they say, I don't know, remember that's not a real answer. It's just a cop out. And when they don't want to talk about uncomfortable things, you simply say, too bad, kid. We follow the functional family rule. We talk, we deal. I've got this great book with lots of pictures in it. I just need 5 minutes of your time, and then we'll move on and talk about it later on. That's it. Now, some of the thinking changes that occur when kids grow their frontal lobe are really important for adults to remember, because what we usually do is make fun of them or shame them for it. And that's really not okay. So kids are egocentric thinkers up until about age 5, 6, 7. This is very black and white, all or nothing, my way or the highway thinking. And as their frontal lobe starts coming online, they move into more abstract, hypothetical what ifs, except when they're angry. And remember, when they're going through puberty and the hormones are raging, they may get more moody and angry. What's important to remember is that they can regress back to that very egocentric stage immediately. So that's why anger management and asking your kiddo, what do you need to do to calm down right now? I can see that you're full of emotion, but it's not okay to treat me this way. It's not okay to act this way. So I'm going to invite you to regulate your emotions and do what you need to do. If they escalate further, then of course they receive a consequence when they earn it. Now remember that kids go through something called an imaginary audience phenomenon. This is when they think everybody's looking at them. And you guys remember how it felt to be 11 with a big old pimple on your nose. You think everybody's looking at it. So that is a very normal part of adolescent development when puberty comes online, because their brain knows they need to go out and find a mate to keep this species going. And so they become hypersensitive to what's going on with their peers and think everybody's looking, and they look in every mirror they can. Please don't shame or make fun of kids for that. Their brain is going through that without them even realizing it. Just like this next one. The personal fable. This is when you think that nothing bad can happen to you, that you're invincible. Now, that's also very normal too, because if you think about being 11, 1 year of your life is 1/11th of your life. When you're 53, like me, it's 1/53rd. And so time is different for kids, and they haven't had the experiences that we have had, or the frontal lobe to predict the consequences. So they may think in an immature way. But what we want to do is ask them to have empathy, ask them to take perspective of other people, ask them to think through their consequences or what might happen if they choose A and choose B. That can help them move out of that egocentric, all or nothing, it's all about me thinking. Okay. Remember that there are specific activities that are great for building empathy. The golden rule is, of course, a classic one. Thank you, Jesus. But remember that the golden rule is do unto others as you would have done to yourself. Now, the platinum rule reverses that. That means learn how other people want to be treated and treat them accordingly. I think it's important to teach both of these to children because of the beautiful values it develops, but also the executive functioning skill of abstract reasoning. Also, ask them to take perspective. How do you think they would feel if that happened? What do you think she's going through right now because this happened to her? What is going on with me right now? Hey, kiddo, I need you to have more empathy. Please make sure that you help them develop perspective taking for them and other people. That grows abstract reasoning and empathy like a wildfire. Now, it's important to also know who your kids' most important influencers are. And here is the short list. At this age, peers circumvent parent. Now, it's always important to remember that you never drop too far down the list as an influencer for your child. What the research shows is that at no other developmental lifetime period do we have more importance placed upon peer relationships than in middle school. This is why I felt so sorry for all the kids going through COVID during middle school, because those sensitive, important, very dramatic relationships are critical to growing the executive functioning skills of our brain. I have learned that all those dramatic interactions that happen in middle school are actually the precursor to learning healthy adult communication. So don't make fun of them for being dramatic. And also, don't take it personally when they don't want to hang out with you, when they want to hang out with their friends more often. And so always important to remember, though, that siblings and your modeling are also big influencers for future behavior. The research shows that one of the best and worst places that kids learn risky behavior is from their older siblings. So if you've got a kiddo who's engaging in high risk behavior around younger ones, that needs some tending to. We need to make sure that our older kids understand that they have to demonstrate healthy behavior and not influence their younger siblings in negative ways. We also need to be aware of that for ourselves. If we're drinking around kids, or kids are seeing us using vaping or nicotine or on our cell phones or computer screens too much, that actually has a big effect, and it sets certain norms. One of my biggest complaints from my young clients is that as soon as mom comes in, she gets on the computer. When dad gets home, he gets right on his phone. These are not healthy norms. Remember that kids are the most important people in the room. And as soon as they're there, we need to focus, pay attention, and connect to them. Okay, so those are the things that you guys can do to set kids up for success in middle school. There's a lot more tools and tricks, but we're going to jump into this list. So this is the list that I put in the second half of the sections of the age group chapters. And these are the high risk behavior that show up in middle school. So I'm going to go through this list. It's long and it's scary, but please know there are so many things that you can do to prevent these things from happening. One of the best things that you can do is talk about each one of these. So let's jump in and understand, why do kids engage in these? Remember, about 13% up to 25% of kids do not engage in substance use during high school. But the reason that the other kids do is because they're curious and they want to figure out what it tastes like and what's going on. That doesn't mean you should let your kids drink or take a sip of your caffeinated or alcoholic beverages. Please tell them, oh no, that hurts brain development. You've got to wait till you're 21 until it's legal for your brain to actually be able to bounce back from the toxic effects of this. So please, none of that. Remember that peer pressure and changing feelings. These are dangerous because if we've got kids who are hanging around with lots of kids who are engaging in risky behavior, their chances of it go up. So you do need to curate friendships with kids, even at this age, and make sure they're making healthy choices. If they're not, it can be a very painful process to separate these peers from each other, but it might be important to do so. I would encourage you to get therapeutic help with that. And if kids are using something or engaging in a behavior to change how they feel, unfortunately, it works really well. I've got a lot of young clients who used marijuana to get to sleep, or because they feel anxious, so they drink alcohol to get rid of their inhibitions. And like I said, unfortunately, these work really well to do that. But in the long run, kids are not using their frontal lobe to grow those skills naturally. They're relying on things that are outside of themselves and having negative effects on their brain for replacement of these natural skills. Okay, so let's dive into what you can do. Create a family code. And in chapter 6 of my book, there is a family code building workshop. And if you guys would like a family code building workshop at your school, please contact Smart Families and they will book us to come out and present a Smart Families program to you guys. Smart Families is helping families delay the use of smartphones until high school. And even if you've already let that genie out of the bottle, please know there's a lot of things you can do to start creating healthy digital habits. And one of those is put them in your family code. When you create a family code, it's just a few sentences which outline what your expectations are. This helps them know what you expect and what the rules are. When you put it into a family code, it makes kids feel unified with you, unified with their family. So please make sure you do that. Now, the family code that's on that screen, you may not be able to read that, so I'm going to read it to you. This is the one that I made up, and this is what we use in my family. In our family, we treat others with kindness, compassion, and respect on and offline. We take care of our brain development. We don't use drugs ever, and only alcohol when we're 21 or over, unless you're in recovery. So please make sure that you create a family code, put it on the wall, then teach kids the actual rates of substance use. Give appropriate consequences when they fail to do that. Use drug testing as a way to give them the #1 refusal skill. And the way that you do that is you say, hey, I'm going to drug test you throughout middle and high school. It's not a punishment, but it gives you the #1 thing to say when somebody asks you if you want to drink or if you want to smoke. You can say, no, my parents drug test me, and you'll get a lot of empathy for that, interestingly enough. Make sure you teach them how to say no. Practice that at the dinner table. Use the prevention calendar as a conversation starter at the dinner table so that you can bring up these topics. And when you hear your kids using really good problem solving, executive functioning, praise them for that. Make sure you add brain-based praise to those conversations when they have a good refusal skill or when they say something that helps you know that they're going to protect their brain. Okay, let's talk a little bit about alcohol. This is the #1 widely abused substances for young people around the globe. And in the United States, the first use is as young as 13 for girls and 11 for boys. It's important to remember that kids are going to try it, usually in high school, but it is not the norm. When I was researching alcohol rates around the globe, I learned that about 70% of the global population does not use alcohol. But in the United States, 50% uses alcohol. That means only half don't. So we actually consume more of the world's illegal drug supply than any other country, and we drink a lot of alcohol. Second and third only to Russia and some other countries that can make it in that top 10 list. Now, here's what we want to teach them, the actual rates. Even though a lot of kids experiment out of curiosity, they don't go on to use it regularly. Minority, only about 42% of kids in any high school situation actually go on to use it on a regular basis. Some of them get into trouble and some of them never do. Out of those kids, about 25% out of 100 kids who try it go on to abuse it. And out of that 100%, about 15% actually go on to become dependent. Out of every 100 people who drink alcohol in our world, 16 of them will become an alcoholic. And most of those are already dependent by the time they graduate from high school. But remember, a large percentage of kids don't. And what you want to do is delay, delay, delay. Make sure you talk about these and let them know they are actually in the majority if they choose not to. But the majority is silent. Can you imagine if all the kids who didn't drink came out of the woodwork and actually made that be cool? That would be some pretty neat peer influence. So let me share with you some myths and facts. Drinking should start young so they get used to it. A lot of parents believe this because maybe that's what they did. But all the research shows that the younger kids start, the greater their risk of growing up and struggling with an alcohol disorder. A lot of parents think, oh, but they're going to go wild if I keep it from them and they start when they get to college. Please know, you guys, everybody goes a little crazy in college, but the kids who haven't used go to college with a fully formed frontal lobe and they just make better decisions. The kids who started in high school have more problems with binge drinking and the negative effects of alcohol as they grow older. A lot of parents think that if they drink, they drink younger in Europe. So it's okay. Why can't we do it here? And the truth is that many European countries have high rates of alcohol problems too. I did a cool study. I interviewed people from France and Greece and Italy and asked them about their norms. And they said that the countries where they sell wine as part of their gross domestic product, they have always had taboos against binge drinking. But the more Americanized cultures get, the more binge drinking becomes a norm. Even France has a big problem with alcohol use disorder today, and they're trying to scramble to figure out what to do. A lot of parents also think, there's no stopping them. What can I do? And the truth is that when we increase the laws, increasing the age of legal drinking, we see problem drinking, accidents, the negative effects of alcohol all go down. You can delay this with your kids, and it's very important you do. You have a lot of power and control as regarding the consequences. Okay, so the next high risk behavior we're going to talk about is marijuana. We see about 39 states in our union have passed laws. And what's interesting is we're seeing the research and how devastating it is for those states. Oregon is a really good example. They legalized a lot of substances, including marijuana, and they just repealed a lot of those bills because they saw the devastating effects that it's having in kids. I'm actually going there this month to talk at a conference about this. So it's very important that you guys know marijuana is an illicit drug today. It's much more potent than it has ever been. If you look at the amount of THC in a plant in 1960, about 2%. Today, the genetically modified drug is up to 99%. And they don't sell it in the bud as much as anymore. They sell it in the vapes, which is a concentrated synthetic version of it. Now, a lot of times people think it's a medicine because of CBD, the molecule in it that reduces pain and swelling. But it's really important to know, and I've got a chart about this in the book, that these dispensaries and chemists that put this stuff together synthetically, they actually decrease CBD because it modulates the THC. Now you can see there's a lot of different THC molecules in marijuana. These are the molecules that cause addiction and make you feel high or intoxicated. A few years back in the Nixon regime, we actually had a law, federal law, that said any Delta 9 products are illegal. Unfortunately, once the chemists learned that they could take Delta 9 out and just put a lot of Delta 8 in the product, they could technically make a legal THC. And so I actually got this advertisement in the mail. I just got another one this week that advertises for 100% legal THC. This came in the mail. And you can see they're advertising a lot of things that might be very appealing to kids. There are dispensaries popping up in neighborhoods all over. If you just walk outside, you'll probably smell marijuana today. This is scary because this stuff can cause anxiety, psychosis, paranoia. It can cause irreparable damage to the brain. It actually hurts sleep and mood problems. A lot of people use it to medicate that, but it actually changes the brain chemistry. It's pretty scary, you guys. Now, the federal government, the FDA, has 2 marijuana medicines and 1 CBD medication, but those are given for people who have very, very severe illnesses and disorders. Remember, these don't cure anything. They just mitigate the symptoms of pain that's caused by cancer or I can't even think of the seizure disorders and things like that. So this is not a medicine that you would take to help you get over anything. These are medicinal products that are only prescribed by doctors for people who have debilitating, painful illnesses. Now, when we see the perception of harm go down, like what you see in this green bar right here in the 80s, when perception was going down, marijuana use went up. It's the opposite. When the perception of harm goes up, marijuana use goes down, as is other drugs. But we see a trend that's happening in our country in the past couple decades that is actually looking at teaching kids that the harms are going down. A lot of even adults think that it must be better and okay if states are legalizing it. But please remember, for every politician in our country, there are 9 alcohol lobbyists and 13 marijuana cannabis industry lobbyists. They are not telling the politicians to pass these drugs because they're medicinal. They're telling them to pass these drugs because they make the cannabis drugs companies a lot of money. We got to teach this to our kids and protect their brain from developing with these in it, because it stops brain development. Alcohol's half-life is about 1 to 3 days. Marijuana's half-life is about 1 to 3 weeks. It arrests brain development much, much longer. And kids will think that everybody's doing it. But over here in the high school chapter, I think it's page 208, I actually have a short list of the past 65 years of research on this. This will show you the exact effects, short and long term, that marijuana has on the brain, on the body, on academics, on how much money you make, on your life satisfaction, and it's not good news. So if anybody has questions about this, please feel free to put them in the chat or jump in. But I'm going to start talking about another topic, e-cigarettes. We see cigarette use going down in young people in our country, but unfortunately, electronic and vaping use is going up. We see a large percentage of kids who are getting this from their friends. This stuff is easy to get. But please remember, nicotine is the #1 most addictive substance on the face of the earth. Kids can get addicted within the first, second, or third time we see brain changes. And it takes on average about 10 years to quit once you get addicted. And so it's very important to remember that if you vape or smoke, do it outside and away from kids. If they smell this stuff, if they're in a room with you while you're using it, they can test positive for nicotine, and they get the secondary effect of getting the liquid, the vaporized e-liquid, into their lungs. Remember, when this stuff heats up, it turns into a vapor, but once it's inhaled into your lung tissue, it re-solidifies and creates a congestion and a gunk in your lung tissue that really shouldn't be there. So remember to help kids critically analyze this. Ask them if they know anybody who's using it and let them know they're going to have a pretty big consequence if they choose to. Now we're going to move into illicit drugs. Now, as you can see by this chart, the percentage of kids who are using illicit substances like cocaine or meth or inhalants or pain medications is young. But remember, this percentage is in every school. That means 1 to 2% of even the nicest school environments are going to have kids who get a hold of this stuff and try to use it recreationally. That's why it is critical for you to talk about this, especially opioids and pills, because we're seeing more kids and adults dying of accidental fentanyl overdose because they're thinking they're taking something else and they don't know that it's a fake pill or it's been laced. So make sure that you teach kids what is a medicine, what is not, when you can take a prescribed medication, and make sure you let them know they should not take anybody else's prescribed medication. Even if they take the same thing, it could be a different dose or come from a different place. Okay, let's talk about bullying and cyberbullying. These were the most disturbing stats that I found when I was researching for my book. Bullying peaks in the 7th grade. Cyberbullying peaks in the 8th. Now, this makes sense because if you guys can notice, after middle school, that statistically significantly drops off and it decreases every year from then on. This makes sense because middle school is in the tail end of the first half of brain development before they get a lot of empathy and abstract reasoning. But for the second half of brain development, all the way up 25, that's when those executive functioning skills come online. And so it is critical to have your conversation about bullying with kids before they enter middle school. You want to teach them how to be an upstander and what that means. And that once they earn any type of technology, they still represent your family code online as well as off. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about adult disconnection. We've got to learn about this. One of my favorite companies out there is Parent ProTech. If your school does not already have a special deal with them to get a discounted subscription, please make sure you contact them. They're actually a Houston startup company, and they teach parents in a very, very easy and friendly way how to use technology, what to do, how to set guidelines and parental controls up. So make sure that you monitor all their technology, role play with them what an upstander looks like. There are 4 different techniques for upstanding, and I've got a really cool story in the tools section of my book that teaches them about the bystander effect. You can ask them, out of the 4 choices that you could be an upstander, which one are you most comfortable with? Because each kid is going to have a different choice. So use brain-based praise to reward that, but make sure you let them know it's not okay and that you're going to trust them, but verify. When kids say, "What, don't you trust me?" The best thing to do is to say, "I trust the part of your brain that's grown and developed. I just don't trust the part that's not yet. So I'm going to check what you're doing online and make sure you're following the family code." Please be an upstander and practice what that looks like and sounds like at home, and then praise them when they do. Ask them lots of questions, give them lots of scenarios, and find out what they're seeing and feeling at school. Okay, so some more about digital dangers. We know that it causes mood problems, health effects, identity issues, all kinds of academic problems with learning and attention. Please, 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 if your school doesn't already have a Smart Families program, contact us. Let's get in there. Please know that this is being funded by a local nonprofit organization, the Kuzma Foundation. They are ready and willing to help schools adopt this amazing program to get in there and take the pledge to wait until high school. And even if your school doesn't, you can get into a little group of parents with all the kids that are hanging out together and just say, "Nope, you guys are all going to have to learn how to hang out in person." Please know that kids appreciate this. Now, on the surface, they may not, but in the end, they do. You can also use the brain balance rule. For every 2 or 3 hours of consecutive rec tech time, they should get off and do something else healthy with their brain. In the tool section, I have the activity pyramid that you can tear out and put on the fridge. And when kids say, oh my God, I'm bored, I don't know what to do. Well, I'm not going to solve that problem for your frontal lobe. So go check on the fridge. I trust you to figure it out. Okay. We know there's a whole host of problems that can come up once kids get a smartphone. Please know it changes them, changes who they are, changes their attention, changes their focus. Delay, delay, delay. The more kids see body image issues, media that promotes high risk behavior, the more that they're on their phone, phubbing other people, the more negative impact it'll have on their learning and their socializing. Now, a lot of times they'll say, oh, but all my friends are on this. Okay, I get it. All your friends are on that. Invite them over. Let's do something in person. Make sure they're in active pro-social activities in person, and then monitor how much time they get on those phones once they earn it. Remember that screen time, video game time, pornography use, all of these things have negative effects on motivation and values. We can see all kinds of problems happening in our kids' social world, academic life, learning from these issues. If you are going to adopt a smart families, I'll come out to your school and do a whole presentation just on technology in the brain so you guys can learn how to and how to actually create really good parenting practices that are easy to apply at home. Okay, a few more high-risk behavior to round this out. Get your questions ready. One of the things that I found out when I was doing this is that there are more problem gamblers in adolescence than in adulthood. And I don't know about you, but on my way home today, I was listening to the NPR show that they were doing about March Madness. Unfortunately, our US government has made it legal in 2018 to bet on college sports events and all kinds of other things. We are seeing it change how people enjoy sports. Every 3 seconds, they can actually bet on something that's happening in a game, really taking them away from enjoying watching all of these amazing athletes excel. So you got to talk to your kids about March is a great time to talk about gambling because they can't estimate errors and calculate odds like an adult frontal lobe can. In the tools section of my book, I have a gambling talk that has a really fun game called Let's Play the Odds and see how well you can estimate the odds of different things. Now, teen dating starts to happen in middle school. And so I wanted to make sure that parents had some guidelines. And one of those is that supervised dating can start between 11 and 14. This is, of course, according to how advanced and mature that particular frontal lobe is. Group dating that is chaperone can happen between 12 and 15, but one-on-one dating really shouldn't start until about 15, 16. And it's important to remember that kids who start dating early have some negative effects. I've actually outlined those in my book in this chapter. And a small percentage of kids are actually already having intercourse by the time they're in 8th grade. So the conversation about this has to happen, and it has to happen early, because your kid is going to know that kid that is engaged in that behavior and is now glamorizing about it. That is not dating. So we need to teach kids what dating is and what dating isn't. And I've got some good codes of ethics for that you can use to back up your own family code. Make sure that you monitor. Exposure to pornography is happening earlier and earlier. By 18 years of age, we've got about 40% of kids who are not only using pornography on a regular basis, but report that that is where they have learned what sex is and what their sexual identity looks like. This affects negative sexual scripts. And a sexual script is what we make up our partner thinks and wants in the area of sex. And so it's really important to know that when they are exposed to pornography and the verbiage and what they see, they're getting the wrong idea about what relationships are and what women and men want in relationships. So we've got to make sure that we reduce the screen usage, put parental controls on it, and make sure that kids are not exposed to this. eating disorders is an issue not just for boys, or excuse me, for girls, but also for boys. And so not feeling like you're good enough or your body looks good enough can have the effect on early dieting or early binge eating, depending upon what the issues are. One of the surveys that I've done over the years here in Houston that I was so heartbroken over is a lot of times kids will write in on these surveys that they're gaining weight and they don't understand why, because they're consuming way too much sugar dense, high calorie foods. If they go online, they're going to see images that tell them that their body is not good enough or not correct. And there's a lot of websites that are pro anorexia and pro negative body images that will encourage kids to act out in an unhealthy way. This can have a negative effect on our mental health. We see depression, anxiety, ADHD, all kinds of negative things that can happen to our kids may also happen during middle school. One of those is self-injury. We see that this starts to go up in adolescence. And by high school, we see about 40% of kids know what self-injury is and maybe have even tried it. And so that, of course, decreases as kids age. But one of the reasons why kids engage in self-injury is because they use it as a coping mechanism to feel better. And they get into media sites or groups that are pro-social about it. We've got to talk to our kids about this before it happens. Another thing that is really scary to talk about is suicide. A lot of times what we see is kids will consider it or they'll think about it. A really normal thing to think about suicide as you're growing and aging, especially as abstract reasoning starts coming online. But a certain percentage of kids, by the time they're in 8th grade, have actually tried it. A lot of times they won't necessarily disclose their intent. Only about 30% do. A majority of them, though, will talk to their friend. So it's important to teach your kids, hey, most kids won't come to adults, but they'll probably come to you. And so if anybody comes to you and says that they're thinking about suicide, I want you to learn how to talk about this and how to take them to a counselor and make sure they get help. Empower your child to be a helper or connect their friends to helpers. Make sure that you know and can dispel some of the myths about suicide. And so here they are. A lot of people think that talking about it will cause suicidal thoughts or actions, and that just is not true. It actually gives voice to people who really do want to talk about it, and it leads to prevention and treatment. Many people think that young people who use suicidal threats, they do so to get attention, and that just doesn't bear out either. If a kid ever tries to threaten suicide, like I'm going to kill myself if you take away my cell phone, that's when we need to sit down and give a consequence and say, that is not okay to use that as a means to manipulate. This is a very serious thing. It would hurt us and our family and you if you were not here anymore. So make sure you let them know that you take that very seriously. A lot of times people think that suicides are unpreventable, but that's also just not the case. Many youth don't disclose their intent, but they display warning signs. What's really scary is when a lot of people missed those warning signs and don't understand what was going on. That's why we've got to talk to kids about it before they get into some of these grades. A lot of negative things that can potentially happen to a kid are called adverse childhood events. And in the very back of this section, I have the ACEs checklist. The more kids say yes to these things, or adults, it corresponds with higher risky behavior and mental health problems as we age. So as I was rounding out the chapter, I kept thinking, I got to do some research on resilience. We've got to know how to build resilient kids that will say no to risky behavior and talk openly about mental health issues. So I did some research and I found out that there is a formula. And here is the checklist for resiliency. You can see the first 3 things on this list are pretty obvious that it's really all about how they feel. Kids who are resilient believe their mother loves them, believe their father loves them, believes other people will take care of them. And if you keep going down that list, you'll see it's about connection. It's about having adults who care enough about kids to give them consequences, to give them rules, to hold them accountable, to be present, connected, and making sure that kids know they are really loved and cared about. That's what builds resilient kids. The research says it just takes one adult to give these things to a child, and they'll probably be okay. All right, you guys. Now, that is the end of this chapter. If you'd like to see more or go back to the third chapter for elementary or forward to the high school and tools, please feel free to purchase the book. Like Sally said, that we do have it for sale on Smart Families at the publisher's discounted rate. It's also available in Spanish and on Audible if you're more of a listener. Please find my children's books, knowyourneuro.org, or the book's website, NeuroWhereAbouts Guide. Are there any questions out there, you guys?
Dr. Collier, I'd love to pose a question that was brought up this morning when we did our morning webinar, and a parent asked, what could some consequences be, if they were to have a child who was engaging in these behaviors? I know that's often a question that many parents have, how, as a parent, do you deal with and use appropriate consequences?
So what I really like to do is use a behavior contract if kids are continually breaking the rules. It doesn't have to be a written contract, though. We contract with our kids all the time. It's important to remember that they should earn all of their privileges, which means they can lose those privileges. That is a consequence. I really don't encourage parents to use the word punishment, and when their kids use the word punishment, to say, this is not a punishment, you earned this consequence. That's real life. And so what that means is that we can earn our cell phone, our screen time, our peer privileges. We can earn our door to our room, all the extra stuff that we get. And that means we can lose all those as consequences. Those are appropriate consequences. You absolutely have the right to expect your children to be RRF, respectful, responsible, and fun to be with. And if they aren't, they can earn some consequences. Now, if they're not fun to be with, we can say, kiddo, you're not being much fun to be with right now. Can you change your mood so this family vacation can be more pleasant? If you can't, do you think you may need a timeout? Or do you think you need to lose your cell phone for a day? That's the type of shaping behavior that we can do on a daily basis with kids. When they start acting out in high-risk behavior, though, I invite you to see a clinician and to say, hey, if you try alcohol, or if you break the rules with maybe a nicotine pen and I find that in your room, or you're staying on technology and using video games way past your bedtime more than once or twice, we're going to go big on those consequences. And if they don't work, then unfortunately, we get to go see a clinician to help us figure out what to do. But also remember, each kiddo is different. One kid, if you can threaten the loss of their cell phone for 2 days, they will never do that again. Whereas another kid might weigh and say, no cell phone a few days, party this weekend. They're going to win out on that party. I've had so many kids over the years say to me, oh, yeah, I took the consequence. It was worth it. Now, that may seem like a kid who's not thinking about their family, and they weren't. That's pretty normal for that brain development, but we have to shape that empathy. That's why instilling values and making sure that kids know they are required to follow those family values in our code is important as they grow and develop. I'm glad you brought that up. That was a good question. Okay, we got some sleepy, tired parents out there who may not have as many questions as we had this morning, but please feel free, you guys. If you have questions for me, you can find me on drcrystalcollier.com. Email me at crystal@drcrystalcollier.com. I'd be glad to help in any way I can. And remember, please sign your school up for a Smart Families project. A lot of times your principal, their hands might feel tied, or your dean doesn't know what to do. Please, as a parent, reach out, get the ball started, give us a contact, and we will make sure we make those for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Collier. I really do want to encourage everybody who's here today, if you do not already have this book in your home, I really implore you to go and purchase this book. This, for those of you you've seen me present before, I am the parent to an 8th grader, a 6th grader, and a 3rd grader. And this book has been very integral in our family life. And we've had this in our home for a long time. And I know Dr. Collier has shared, not only have parents been reading this, and this chapter was just one chapter out of many that the book covers, but I know, Dr. Collier, you've shared that you've even had children who've read this book too. So,
yes,
you know,
I've got 19 high school interns and 2 college interns right now who are helping me write the youth version of this. If anybody's got an 8th grader through college who might want to do an internship with me, please go to knowyourneuro.org student page and they can find out some information on that.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
I'm not sure if I'm just going to do one last, see if there's any last questions before we sign off for the evening.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Lots of parents saying thank you. Thank you guys for coming tonight. I appreciate you being here. And please let us know whatever else we can do to support you. And thanks to the Kuzmas and to Smart Families for underwriting and supporting this project tonight.
Well, thank you, Dr. Collier, and thank you everybody for carving out time in your evening for joining us. Please feel free to go to our website. You can sign up to our newsletters and look at our content there. And I think Dean has also just put into the chat, this was a recorded presentation. It will be available on our website in the future. So we would love you to share all of this content and share it with your friends, family members. But thank you so much, everybody. And thank you again, Dr. Collier. Have a great evening, everybody.